Hello, my name is Christopher Runstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Runstrom Astrology. And today, I wanted to talk to you about the very rare Jupiter-Saturn square taking place on August 19th. Now, Jupiter, we know as being the planet of good fortune and higher purpose. It's jovial in nature, naturally optimistic, and always looks on the bright side of things. Jupiter is associated to our faith and our beliefs. It's associated to our connection to a higher purpose in life. We might call that God, we might call that the universe, we might call it our higher selves. But anything that connects us to a higher purpose in life, something that we find inspiring, influential, and helps us to aspire to be our better selves, these are the things that are connected with Jupiter. Saturn is the planet of tests, trials, and tribulations. It feels like Saturn is always setting up obstacles in our path. It's testing our convictions, it's making us face very tough choices, and it can often make us feel like we aren't going to be able to get up and over that obstacle, that we aren't prepared, that we aren't able, that we aren't capable of doing anything that's better. Jupiter, you can sort of see as the hand that giveth, and Saturn, you can see as the hand that taketh away. So, in essence, they are two flip sides of the same coin, and that coin would be fate. With Jupiter, there's a feeling that I make my own destiny, that I make my own fate, that I become the best that I can be, and by being the best that I can be, I'm going to be good to other people. Saturn, on the other hand, is that fate that's always foiling you. It's the planet that's connected with not getting the lucky break, with not getting the audition or passing the test or getting the job that you had hoped to get. My being made to feel like it's just one problem after another. And after a while, the succession of problems and difficulties can become toilsome and tedious and may lend themselves to a pessimism, even a sense of failure, a feeling of like, why bother trying? There's nothing that I can do to turn this around. This is my fate. This is my lot in life. All right, so when these two planets come into a square with one another, and a square in astrology describes a conflict, a sort of one-upmanship that takes place between these two planets, both of them are going to be going at it full on. Okay, if you kind of think of it as an arm wrestling contest, Jupiter is like, good will prevail, believe in yourself and you will get good things. And Saturn's like, this will not happen. It will be a disappointment just like last time. Well, we rise from our disappointments so that we can do better. Yes, we rise from them only to be disillusioned, even more so, and to make things more miserable. You can sort of see where the dialogue or the conversation is going to go. Now, Greek mythology is really where we turn to the origin of the meanings of many of the planets that we work with in astrology. And Jupiter and Saturn have a lot of history. Greek mythology begins really with Saturn's overthrow of his father, Uranus. Uranus and Gaia are the two generative forces in the universe. That's the sky god and the earth goddess. But there comes a point when the sky god needs to be overthrown, and so Saturn does this. Saturn overthrows his father, and he liberates Earth to live. And when he does this, it's immediately prophesied that Saturn will in turn be overthrown by one of his children because he had just overthrown his father, and that's going to sort of be passed down through the generations. Saturn, frightened by this prospect of being himself overthrown, swallows each one of his children when they are born, and they end up in the belly of Saturn. They end up sort of in a place of stasis, of non-time, of sort of languishing in a cocoon-like state. One of the children escapes, and that's Jupiter. Saturn's wife, Rhea, Jupiter's mother, winds him up in swaddling clothes and secrets him out of the palace. Then she turns to Saturn, who's like, give me the latest child. And she takes a boulder and she wraps that in swaddling clothes and hands it to him, and he gulps it down and he's satisfied and he goes on with his day. Well, Jupiter comes of age on some sort of island in the Mediterranean. I forget which one it is. And Jupiter comes of age and he becomes a virile young man, a storm warrior god, and he's going to take on his father, Saturn, or Kronos, which is his Greek name. And Jupiter does. He leads a legion of allies against Saturn. And with his thunderbolt, he overwhelms Saturn's forces and he overthrows his father. And when he's vanquished his father, he makes his father throw up, basically barf up his brothers and sisters, and they will become his fellow Olympians. And those are Hades, who we know as Pluto, Poseidon, whom we know as Neptune. There was Hera, his sister and his wife, who we know as Juno. And there was Vesta. And then there was Demeter, Ceres. And these are the first Olympians. These are his first fellow brother and sister gods and goddesses. And so Jupiter sets up a reign, a glorious reign, which is the reign of the Olympians. Now, as you might imagine, it was also prophesied that Jupiter himself was going to be overthrown by one of his children. And what's fascinating here is that the two children who were basically cited to be the ones to overthrow Jupiter, he does eat the first one, Athena's mother, and out of Jupiter's head she springs. And the second one he has sewn into his body. And when that one comes of age, he sprouts out of the body of Zeus and he becomes Bacchus or Dionysus. Now, why am I telling you all of this? This really sets up the difference in astrological meanings of Jupiter and Saturn. Saturn, whose Greek name is Kronos, was named after time. So everything born into this world is born into time. An old saying, actually, which is time eats its young. That, in other words, we're born into the world young, and then we grow old and decay and die, and then there's another generation. So Saturn was really about the withholding. When he prevents the other generation from rising to power, he swallows them and they stay in his stomach until Jupiter vanquishes him and forces him to vomit them up. So Saturn has been seen in astrology as a withholding energy, holding on to and not giving up. And so Jupiter, faced with the same idea of a generation coming up, he swallows the first one, the mother of the first one, who is Metis, and gives birth to Athena out of his head. And then the second one, Dionysus as a fetus, is sewn into his thigh, and then Dionysus emerges. And this is kind of also fascinating because both gods are transexed. Athena springs from Zeus's head as a warrior. Greek society was very patriarchal and very much subjugated women, all right? So Athena roaring out of Zeus's head in full body armor, she's a goddess, but she's wearing male apparel. And then Dionysus later, who emerges from Jupiter's thigh, is described as being very feminine in appearance. Dionysus could be mistaken as a woman, clean-shaven, long locks, very beautiful, and Dionysus is the god of wine. What's interesting is that we see this sort of transexing of the gods, but the bigger point that I wanted to make is that Jupiter survives the overthrow of a future generation by integrating the gods into his body. Jupiter, in his Greek guise as Zeus, is the god of the political body. He's the god of the polis, the political state. And so by Jupiter taking this goddess, this god into his body, they are reimagined, they are repurposed, they are reintroduced into the world, not as hostile figures to Jupiter, but as part of Jupiter's body. The point that I want to make here is Jupiter as a planet is an integrating planet. This is a planet that wants to integrate different energies into itself. So Jupiter was a benign and governing energy. Not only does Jupiter rescue his brothers and sister from stasis, from non-being, and brings them to life, but he appoints them in his governorship. And Jupiter has that same quality in an astrological chart. It's a governing planet. And it's one that sort of really oversees how everyone else is getting along. So that's the Jupiterian part of the component. When we think of a Jupiter-Saturn square, you can think of it literally as the overthrow of the old order. All right. Jupiter is coming up and overthrowing Saturn's older. So you can have old versus young. And there has been a lot of talk about hostility between the generations, a lot of talk about how old people won't give up the authority, they won't give up the scepter, they won't give up the control, they won't make way for youth. And that has become associated with Saturn. So when you have a Jupiter-Saturn square, like we're having on August 19th, what you may hear a lot about is it's time to overthrow the old generation. And this is mirrored in the astrological signs themselves. Remember that astrology is a calendar. It's not a science, it's not a religion, it's a calendar. It's why every major civilization on this planet developed some sort of form of astrology, whether that's Middle Eastern, Indian, Chinese, there's Mesoamerican astrology. And by the way, these are just the astrologies we know about. There are bound to have been all sorts of astrologies that we don't know about because the records have not survived. In any case, when we look at an agricultural year here in the Northern Hemisphere, which is where astrology originates from, Gemini is a young sign. Why is Gemini a young sign? Gemini is a young sign because every year begins with Aries in the zodiacal circle of signs. Every year begins with Aries. Aries is connected to the spring equinox. And so the spring signs, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, are seen as young signs. Okay. There's a freshness to the spring signs, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. Pisces, which is where Saturn is situated right now. Pisces is the last of the zodiac signs. So Pisces is the last sign before the spring equinox, the new year. And let's remember that the new year for several centuries was celebrated at the spring equinox, not January 1st. So Pisces comes at the end of an agricultural year. So Saturn in Pisces literally is old and at the end. So we have this kind of intergenerational conflict between the Jupiter in Gemini, which is, I'm young and fresh and I have wonderful, innovative ideas, and move it along, old man Saturn in Pisces. Your time has come and gone. And now it's time for new blood. Let's open up the windows and doorways of our minds and souls and bring in some fresh air and have it circulate. Okay. So this is basically the message of the Jupiter in Gemini. And Saturn in Pisces is kind of like, not so fast. I'm not giving up what I've gained or acquired, and you can't push me around. And, I'm not going to go gently into that good night. And Saturn for Jupiter was a constant problem because Saturn, his father, was a god. You can't kill a god. So it was always the question of, what do you do with the old man? Type of thing. And this was something that astrologers in the early medieval period and Renaissance seized upon, this idea of Jupiter versus Saturn. So you have this kind of old versus young thing that's going on as well. What we also see here is the conflict in status, particularly in medieval manuscripts and representations of Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is shown often as the Pope, all right? Because the Pope was the most powerful figure in Europe. There were kingdoms, but they all paid tithes, taxes, things like that to the Pope. And the Pope was often a figure that was connected to Jupiter. So Jupiter, back then, a planet that was always associated with emperors, and hence the Pope being the head of the Holy Roman Empire, and even the emperor part of the Holy Roman Empire genuflected to the Pope. The Pope was this very powerful figure, and if you were going to be a part of this world, you had to be a Christian. What did Saturn represent? Saturn represented peasants, the underclass, the people who were under the heel of the Pope. So on one hand, you would have the king or an emperor and the Pope and the clerics attending, showing Jupiter, which are, we are the winners of history, and Saturn represented the losers of history, the old civilizations that had crumbled and fallen apart, the old civilizations that were perhaps wiser than the current one, but they were ruined and they were buried beneath the sands of the deserts, like Egypt but it was a faraway time and they were long ago defeated. So Saturn represented history's losers, the history that was forgotten, the history that was overwritten by the winners. And so Saturn, particularly in medieval and Renaissance astrology, was associated to the poor, to the peasants, to the hard workers, the hard laborers, people who were trying to scratch out a living from the earth. Things did not come easy for people born under the planet Saturn. Saturn represented marginalized people. They were the people on the sidelines of society. They were marginalized. And as a quick note, what's also really interesting is Saturn represented Jews and Muslims. These were people that refused to bend the knee, for lack of a better word, or to genuflect. They refused to convert to Christianity. The Jewish people were seen all through Western Europe, but they were often given a lesser status in the medieval period. The Muslims were associated to the Ottoman Empire, who was the enemy of Europe. And again, they believed in Muhammad, and Jews believed in God, but not Christ. And so they were seen as not Christian. In fact, the term anti-Christian, which lends itself to anti-Christ, becomes connected to Saturn because of its refusal to be integrated into society. These were faiths and beliefs that maintained their traditions and would not convert, would not come on over to the Pope's side of the riverbank there, and they were defiant in their commitment. And by being anti Christians, they were seen as the enemy. So this puts another different perspective on the Jupiter and the Saturn square. We can think of Jupiter-Saturn squaring as young versus the old, but also talks about integration versus segregation. All right. So Jupiter was really sort of like, come and join the body of God, come and join Christ's church, and you will have a place at the table. Everyone is welcome here. And if you don't join, you will be an outcast. You will be outlawed. You will be vilified. And so all of that got what we later call the shadow, all of that gets projected onto anything Saturnian. And so anything Saturnian can cause fear and anxiety, but it can also be regarded as being obstinate, as being other, as being outsider. And again, these are ideas that are going to be emerging with the Jupiter-Saturn square. Now, that's a lot of history that I just shared with you. But then again, it's not every day that you have a Jupiter-Saturn square. They are very rare aspects. Another way to sort of think of as Jupiter-Saturn square that might be sort of an easier way to follow would be, are you familiar with Winnie the Pooh? Okay, if you're familiar with Winnie the Pooh, you can think of Jupiter is Tigger, okay? And as you might recall, Tigger is always buoyant and happy-go-lucky and always seeing the bright side of things. And Tigger's big motto is Tigger's always bounce back. Okay, so Tigger is a really good example of like Jupiter, particularly a Jupiter in Gemini. All right, it's very optimistic, it's very buoyant, you bounce back, a lot of fun to the party. All right, Saturn and Pisces, we might associate to Eeyore. Eeyore, as you might recall, is a donkey who often loses his tail that has to be found and pinned back onto him again. And Eeyore always sees the glum side of life. Eeyore will always say things to Winnie the Pooh like, "Oh, Pooh, it will never work." So Eeyore is always pessimistic. He's saying that things will never work. And Eeyore's always under a bit of a cloud. And Eeyore is kind of like a downer, but nevertheless, he's a citizen of the 100-Acre Wood, and people do like to hang out with Eeyore. And Eeyore is comfortable with his pessimism and his sort of grave view of life and his depressed type of temperament, his melancholia, shall we say. Eeyore is very comfortable with that. So when you have these two planets forming a square, as I said, squares, they're going to be fighting for the upper hand. Jupiter or Tigger will always be arguing for the bounce, bouncing back, coming back from something, having a very jovial view of life. And Eeyore will always be arguing for things never working out, that life is full of disappointment. And this is the way that you can sort of think of the square between these two planets. And that's how I would like to begin to talk about the square, the Jupiter-Saturn square, as it pertains to each and every one of the zodiac signs. For people born under the zodiac sign of Aries, there is going to be a natural affinity for Jupiter in the zodiac sign of Gemini. That's because Gemini is an air sign, Aries is a fire sign, and these are two elements that very much get one another. They animate one another. Fire and air always get along. And so, with Jupiter in the sign of Gemini, you may have noticed since it entered Gemini at the end of March of 2024, you may have noticed an uptick in the change of people that you hang out with, that you fraternize with, that you're friends with. Your life may have sped up in ways that you really couldn't have imagined before. You might even be looking at a whole new set of friends or coworkers or associates, people that you fraternize with. And the result should be a positive one. New friends or acquaintances, getting to know people always bring fresh perspectives. But when you're connecting with people that you feel really get you and really understand you, that makes it even more encouraging. That makes it even more pleasant. That makes it even more exciting. You feel like, hey, I found my tribe. I found people who really, really understand me. And so there may be a tendency with this new set of friends, or maybe it's a new neighborhood that you're living in, to really hang out with them and to go along with what they say. These are the things that you enjoy. You might even want to show off a little bit that you're just as smart as they are, that you're just as funny as they are, that you're just as much a bon vivant. And they may laugh at your jokes and applaud and really back you up on your points of view and the things that you have to say and have a keen interest in what your opinion may very well be. And so that Jupiter and Gemini may bring that Aries energy more in its direction, right? The Saturn in Pisces may kind of create this, I think it's called imposter syndrome, right? The Saturn in Pisces is occupying right now an area of your solar chart that's a very sensitive area of your solar chart. It's that part of you, Aries, that needs time away from other people, that really needs time to reflect. It's a part of you that may feel heavier. It has disagreements that it doesn't feel like it should voice for fear of being a spoiler or a downer in some way, or it just may be an experience of dark moods. Saturn is a depressant in astrology, and it can bring darker moods. And there are some elements that are comfortable with darker moods, some elements that are not. Aries being a fire sign, the feeling of a darker mood can be this feeling that my fire is about to be extinguished, that my light is about to be dimmed or darkened. Aries can have a very strong reaction against dark mood by wanting to keep it at bay, maybe by becoming more Marsy, more willpower, more athletic, or working out more, or with the sextile to Jupiter in Gemini might be to socialize more and hang out with people who are like real uppers for you. And so, what this may bring with this square can be a couple of things. One can be this idea that you don't want the new group of people, the new crowd, to know that you have darker moods or that you take things as personally or as sensitively as you take them, or that you are carrying very heavy obligations. You don't want them to know that because you want to be chipper, and you enjoy the uplift from them. So you don't want to be the spoiler or the downer in the room. And so what can happen is that you may split yourself between the people who you see as uppers and this feeling of downcastness that you're very uncomfortable with. And that could be making you feel more and more alone with people that you're really enjoying the company with, like that perhaps they would never understand this side of you. And that could lead to you not sharing a lot of personal things about yourself. That could even lead to you taking on a bit of an ostracizing quality. Like you really enjoy this new set of friends who's very optimistic and joyful. And so you don't want any glum people around. And so you may find yourself sort of showing them the door or keeping them away. And you might even become someone who targets people who are having a hard time and maybe even mocking them in some way. Which isn't really a flattering part of any sort of personality. But the reason you may be doing it is because as an Aries being Mars ruled, you don't want to be around anything that seems weak or that seems meek. That might make you uncomfortable. So, what this is going to bring up, all Jupiter Saturn squares bring up some kind of moral dilemma. And what this may bring up is, do you share with this new group of friends who you really are underneath, your personal anxieties or bouts with moods? Or do you continue to segregate that, to separate that? And is separating that a good idea? Is it actually causing an increase in stress and anxiety for you? In your efforts to want to belong, are you turning others into outsiders, into outcasts? And are you becoming someone who does that, which is not Aries? Aries is an advocate, a natural advocate for those who are having a hard time to help them get back up on their feet. Aries is the coach. Let me help you get back up on your feet and show you can fight back or fend for yourself. So if you find yourself doing things like really critiquing people for being weak or downers and ostracizing them in some way, I want you to really pay attention to that because that may be expressing some of the struggle that I'm talking about with you. And remember, it is not the nature of Aries to bully people or to put them down. It is the nature of Aries to be their advocate and to be their champion. And by championing others, you also champion yourself. For people born under Taurus, this Jupiter Saturn square is going to be very interesting how it plays out in your life. On one hand, Taurus is an earth sign, Pisces is a water sign. So there is a natural sextile energy between Taurus and Pisces. In other words, you may be more inclined towards the Saturnian part of this square, to preserving the status quo, to not being moved before you're ready to move, to standing up for consistency and stability. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that people born under Taurus have been dealing with Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, spinning through your sign. And so you've had a number of years there where you've experienced your life being thrown upside down or being turned inside out. And some of that fixity, which has made Taurus so steadfast, has become more comfortable with sudden change, more comfortable with the notion that things do change and that you have to make room for change. So Taurians have kind of turned into progressives. Okay. And that might even be a dark secret for you. But this understanding that the time for change is now, that the old way of doing things isn't really keeping up with where the world is, and that no one can really afford to have a retrograde point of view of things. And so, as a Taurus, because Uranus is so powerful in your sign right now, you might be all in for change. And you yourself might have participated in the removal of maybe a boss or an authority figure or a client who's no longer as valuable as they once were. You yourself may have participated in making a decision to remove, to overthrow, to ask for someone to resign. Now, that doesn't mean that you're in this position of authority where you said it, but you may have come down on the side of wanting change. And what's interesting here is that when we're dealing with change in the water and the earth signs, or let's say when we're dealing with the idea of change in an earth sign like Taurus, there's a feeling that if you're going to make a change, it has to be full on. Okay. It can't be halfway. It can't be sort of, kind of, sort of. Okay. It's got to be full on. But there's also this anxiety about what if this change doesn't work? What if we removed something that really gave us stability? What if we removed something that really gave us security? And so there can be a fear factor here. There can be an increase in anxiety. This is where you sort of can reconnect to your Taurusness, which is an understanding that things grow in the world. Things can come into the world, they can be fresh and young, things can mature, and things can grow old and feeble. This is something that the earth signs are very attuned to, and so they can tell, even though an earth sign will hold on to something till its last possible moment, they can tell when it's like, oh, okay, we're way past the expiration date here. You may be at a place where you're committed to seeing this change through and that you realize that it's too late to back out, that it's too late to go back the way that you had come. And so you really have to move forward and you have to get other people to move forward with you. And at the same time, you're hoping that you've made the right decision. There may be a part of you that's still putting on the brake. There may be a part of you that's still holding back, but get yourself to move forward with the changes that you see happening around you, the changes that you find yourself championing, because the worst place for you to be right now would be to stop in the middle of the road and to leave things hanging. That would only make what's already a dubious situation worse. So go ahead and make the break. Go ahead and introduce the change or the reform. Hope for the best. And chances are you will come out on the other side in a much better position than you were going into this whole Jupiter-Saturn square. People born under Gemini have enjoyed this wonderful period of time since the end of March with Jupiter traveling through your zodiac sign. Jupiter brings good fortune, it brings higher purpose, and Jupiter also brings protection. Like the planet in our solar system that basically takes all the hits from the asteroids and the meteorites, because Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system, Jupiter acts as a protector when it's traveling through your zodiac sign. You kind of like have a guardian angel that's looking out for you and is showing you how to get through difficult times. These are all wonderful things that come with Jupiter traveling through your zodiac sign. What Jupiter traveling through your zodiac sign can also do is that it can bring out an imperious nature. The sun is associated with kings, and kings rule over their kingdoms, but Jupiter was associated with emperors. And emperors back in the day would collect kingdoms, kings and their kingdoms, like an enormous corporation collecting and amassing smaller companies. So there is a grandness, there is an imperiousness, there is an invulnerability that can come with Jupiter traveling through your own zodiac sign. Things are working out for you. You feel like you're making headway in your life. You feel like this is my time and I deserve it. And these are the sorts of things that can happen. But what you have to watch out for is Gemini is a young sign. So there is this youth, there is this exuberance, there's this way of looking at life, which is essentially optimistic, which all of the spring signs, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, all share, regardless of the element that they're in. So what you can sort of have here with the Jupiter moving through Gemini, it's kind of reminiscent of an adolescent kid who's convinced that, now that they can drive, okay, let's say they're 16. I think you drive at 16, if I remember. Now that they can drive and they can vote, that's 18, they're an adult, they can get to go and do all these things that they've wanted to do. They don't have to ask permission anymore. They don't have to be anxious about their parents. I'm going to go out and drive and vote and opine and make my presence known. And there's a real impatience to grab the reins of adulthood. And so there can be this kind of like adolescent restlessness going on, this feeling like, I've come of age and I can have these things and this is what I'm going to do with them. I'm not going to be in the background. I'm not going to be told what to do. I'm not going to be under anyone's thumb, which is great if we weren't dealing with a square to Saturn. Okay. Saturn is that crotchety adult, that cranky adult. Saturn is the one saying, as long as you're under my roof, or you can have all the say that you want as long as once you start paying your own way. But until you do, you're going to do things like this. And so Saturn is going to be invoking its authority. And as a Gemini, you may feel like this is holding you back. You may feel like this is crimping your style. You may feel like this is thwarting you from becoming who you believe yourself to be. It may be thwarting you in your aspirations, maybe thwarting you in your ambitions. It may be thwarting you in the way that you express yourself, and you may want nothing to do with it. You might want to fight back. Saturn is in the zodiac sign of Pisces. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is in your own zodiac sign, which means that wherever you may want to go to follow your Jupiterian call to go out into the world, you're going to be dragging Saturn along with you. Okay, you can't be rid of Saturn because Saturn's in Pisces, it's ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter's in your sign. So there will be that doubt. There will be that anxiety. There will be that voice of conscience that you're wrestling with and maybe trying to talk over or ignore. These obstacles are tests that Saturn is bringing right now. And Saturn's basically saying, okay, if you want to drive that car, how are you going to pay for it? Or if you want to vote, what do you really have to bring to society? If you want to be an adult, are you self-sufficient or are you still living in your parents' basement? Okay, this is what Saturn, and this is tough, especially, with the way the economy has been. These are really tough obstacles, and these are really, really tough reality checks. Saturn will also be saying to you, there are consequences to your actions. There are repercussions to the things that you say. And you can't just laugh it off or say, wave it away or anything along those lines. You have to have accountability. You have to take responsibility. Some Geminis might not do very well with this, and others may actually see this as an occasion to really step into themselves. Saturn is going to reveal the vulnerabilities in your life. It's going to reveal the weaknesses. It's going to reveal the faults in your foundation. And what are you going to do with that? So as a Gemini, you have to absorb this part of life that you might not find really appealing. But as a Gemini, you can also depend upon your own conversational ability. In other words, Geminis have a way of being able to talk to anyone in the room. And so when you have Jupiter and Gemini, you have a way to talk to any of the planets that are transiting or being triggered in the sky by transit in your own astrological chart. So if you really bring to these encounters the willingness to learn and grow, you will learn and grow. And in a good way, you will become that person, that adult that you've always wanted to be. For people born under Cancer, this Jupiter-Saturn square is going to be a very profound one. The reason for the profundity is that you have recently come into your own. Maybe you've ended a certain chapter in your life. Maybe you've undergone a terrific change. Maybe you finally concluded or completed something. But for people born under the zodiac sign of Cancer, there's this feeling of having come into your own, but also asking the question, at what cost? I've come into my own. I'm on the other side of Pluto having been opposite me in the zodiac sign of Capricorn. But at what cost in terms of security? At what cost in terms of stability? At what cost in terms of familiarity? Okay, so for most people, when they're facing those things, it's kind of like a little bird getting ready to leave the nest. What it wants to do is, fly. They don't get up and fly. They throw themselves out of the nest and they tumble on down and they're, feathers or fluff save them, or maybe they open up their wings a little bit, but it's not a graceful departure, shall we say, from the nest that these birds engage in. And we can leave the nest at different stages of our lives. It's not just leaving the nest because we've reached our late teens or early 20s or something along those lines. There are lots of different rites of passage. There are lots of different leave takings of nests in various and sundry manifestations. But for Cancer, you were ready for this departure. You were ready for this new beginning. And in the Jupiter-Saturn square, your inclination is going to be more towards Saturn. That's because Cancer is a water sign. Saturn is in Pisces, which is a water sign. So you're really going to be resonating much more with that Saturnian energy than perhaps the Jupiterian energy. Or at least let's just say that the Saturnian energy is what's showing up more than the Jupiter energy is. Things take twice as long to come together when Saturn is powerful, and they also take twice as long to fall apart. So as a Cancer, you may feel like, you're ready for a new beginning, but you're kind of like in this. Remember when I was talking about how Saturn swallowed his children, the first generation there, the fellow Olympians that Jupiter was going to come and rescue? You may feel like you've gone down into the gullet and the belly of Saturn, that things have slowed to a stop, that things are taking forever to come together in what is supposed to be you crossing the threshold in your new life. In some regards, you may even feel like you're sliding backwards a bit, as things are delayed or postponed. And that's Saturn. Saturn is named after the god of time, Kronos, but Saturn is also associated to timelessness, which can be a suspension of time, like a suspended animation. In science fiction, people rocket off to faraway galaxies and they put themselves into suspended animation where they're asleep and they're preserved and they don't grow old. That can be the feeling that may be going on now. And this feeling that things are emerging, but they're not really emerging fast enough or in a way that you can gain traction. So in this regard, you need to sort of relax and you need to go with the flow. For some of you Cancerians out there, it might be like, how much longer am I supposed to wait? I've been asked to wait for years. I had Pluto in opposite sign of Capricorn since 2008. It's been nothing but, it's not that sort of thing. What it is that the stars are readying you for the next step, but you're not quite there yet. So you may be feeling this Jupiter-Saturn square as a sort of suspension of activity, but then you're feeling all the Jupiterian restlessness, like I need to be doing something. You may also be feeling anxiety about leaving something that's secure or familiar. But what I want you to do is to let things unfold organically for you, not to force the issue. And you will see that they do unfold in their own time, because that's Saturn. Saturn is much wiser than we are about judging when we're really capable of something or whether the time for something has really come. So what I'm asking you to do with this Jupiter-Saturn square is to trust in the timing of Saturn. It's not going to be your own personal timing, but it's going to be the timing of Saturn, because Saturn is bringing about an unfolding of each of the steps that you need to take to get to where you want to go. And it's also going to allow you to let go and say goodbye of what's come before. Because what you're really looking at here, Cancer, is a future which isn't, it's this future you're looking at isn't about a leap into the beyond, a leap of faith. It's really a blank canvas. And you're really like a painter sitting before a blank canvas where you can paint whatever you want to paint. But you need this time that Saturn is prominent so that you don't paint what you already know, but that you're open to this blank canvas and you begin to paint from imagination or vision, that you're not reproducing what's familiar, but rather you're creating something that's fresh and new and that feels much more true to who you are. And this is what you're going to be experiencing between now and the end of December of this year. For people born under the zodiac sign of Leo, this is a very aspirational time for you. Some of what's going on in your life is similar to what's going on in the lives of people born under the zodiac sign of Aries. Mainly, there is a new group of people in your life. They may be friends or associates, but because of the position of Jupiter in your chart, I would imagine that these are people that may have a higher view of you than you have of yourself. Now, that might sound like, that they're cheerleaders, very supportive types of people. People are like, you're a wonderful person and you should love yourself more. And that would be nice. But there's a little bit more going on than that. What it is that they're like, have you ever thought of doing this? Or, you're really talented in this area. And I think you might be better off going in this direction. Or, hey, I really like that idea that you presented. Let me introduce you to someone who can make things happen for you. Or they may simply be recognizing a skill or a talent in you, maybe one that you've given up on, and they're like, let's give that another go. Let's try that again. So these are people in your life who may actually be in higher positions socially than you are, or higher positions of influence. But these are people in your life who see you in a way that you would like to see yourself. When they look at you, they see someone who's very accomplished, who's very talented, who's very appealing, charismatic. And, they're going to be very much like, you should be doing so much more with, this talent, this skill, this ability, who you are. You could do better than the relationship you're in or the job you're toiling at. Okay. So they want to push you in a direction where you are faring better than you are faring right now. And right now, they're the ones who really see you in this way. And you want to be that person that they see. Okay. That would be like really great if you got that break, if you made that introduction, if you were brought into the sphere of someone who's very influential and things like that. And so this is where Jupiter is taking you. Jupiter is in Gemini, it's an air sign. So it's forming a sextile to your fire sign. Leo's a fire sign to your sun in the zodiac sign of Leo. Leos can have a tendency to sort of put a limit on what they're capable of doing. And it's going to be an air sign, particularly an air sign like Gemini, who's going to be pointing out all the possibilities, all the things that you didn't maximize as much as you could have, all the alternatives. Okay, so this is a lot of the stimulus that you're getting in your life. And you're sort of being borne aloft on their future vision of you, their aspirational vision of you. And again, part of you may be like, I hope I can live up to that. And another part of you might be like, of course I could live up to that. I'm a Leo. All right. And this is a wonderful thing. Where you may be getting a pushback might be with the people you know in your life. They may be loved ones. They may be very, very close friends. And they may be warning you about these people. They might be saying, maybe you're getting used, maybe you're getting exploited. No one just comes into your life and sees you in these glowing golden ways. There must be a hidden agenda. Or maybe the familiar people in your life might not like who you're turning into. It might be little things like, you used to have time for me, or used to make time for me, or, family used to be a priority. Or it might be that they feel like you're becoming more brash. You're becoming foolhardy, that you're sort of getting carried away by what's going on. And that can put you in a peculiar position. As a Leo, you always have to answer to yourself. And as a fire sign, you always have to answer to your future. You're always in a state of becoming better, flying higher, becoming more realized as a person. This is a cardinal virtue for all the fire signs. The future is where you want to be, not stuck where you are. Okay, this is a fire sign thing. And it's a good thing because it gets you out there into the world. It gets you out there into your future. It gets you out there risking and being adventurous. But the Saturn in Pisces might be showing up in areas of your life where you feel vulnerable, where people who support you counted on, you're not feeling it forthcoming. Leos really need the approval of other people, which is funny because Leo is a very parental sign. And often Leo is the sign that people come looking for your approval. But Leos want the approval of others, or at least they want people to like them. They want people to like them a lot, and that's a good thing, because Leo's sunny and it enjoys that joy, which is in the exchanges of like, I like you. No, I like you. No, I love you. I love you more. Leos love that. All right. And so to have people who are like, I don't know, are you sure this is the way you want to go? Are you getting maybe a little full of yourself? Those are downers as far as Leo is concerned. And so it might almost be like, well, are you being a downer because you're jealous? Are you being a downer because you care for me? Or are you being a downer because you're possessive? Are you being a downer because you don't see how you could do it, but I'm doing it? And so, that just doesn't compute in your universe. These are natural questions that always occur whenever there is a change in status. A change in status can happen through accomplishment, and a change in status can happen through good fortune, where suddenly, you're lifted up, and there are going to be some people who are for that and some people who are against it. So what I'm counseling you to do is that if you're all in with the people who are, the people who see a better future, who want you to go in that direction, if you're all in with that, as a fire sign, you have to follow that. This is what fire signs do, to have the audacity, the bravery, the courage to realize yourself and to answer that call. But not everyone who's voicing critiques are doing it out of a jealousy or a fear of abandonment or loss of your friendship. They may seriously be doing it as a voice of conscience. They may seriously be sharing reservations about who you're turning into. And that's worth acknowledging as well. But the simple thing that I want to share with you for just this particular Jupiter-Saturn square, we'll have another one in December. The simple thing is follow the aspiration, but don't try to get the people who aren't into it into it. You don't need their approval. You don't need their support. You also don't need to tell them, I don't need your approval. I don't need your support. You don't have to make them choose between themselves and you. You can leave them alone, and you can recognize that they're going through a process too. It's not just the person who's changing who changes. It's the people around the person who's changing who also have to change. Some of them will be like, oh, this is great. And some of them is like, I'm not interested in changing. I want things to go back to the way they were. And you have to allow people to have a sour moment or not really flattering moment or whatever. Let them be. If they disapprove of what you're doing, let that be okay. And you can make them feel okay about it. You're on an uplift here with fire, air energy. You can afford to be generous in that regard. But at the same time, if something is staying with you as a sort of pricking of the conscience, hold that. Hold that in your heart, because that could be a gift that's coming to you from an intimate. That could be a gift of insight. Often what happens with gifts of insight that prick our conscience, we can be annoyed and angry at it and maybe even want to bark back or explain it away. But in this regard, let it just live there in you, because that insight hasn't grown into a realization yet. Right now, it's something that, it's spoiling your fun or whatever, but let it just sort of live there, because in the months to come between now and December, you may come to value that insight quite deeply. And you may want to reach out to the person who shared that with you for a one-on-one conversation that will be valuable at that time. But that time isn't now. It's not valuable now, but it will be in the future. And let that person be there for you. Let your paths come back together in that future time, probably nearer December. And for right now, let yourself soar, let yourself be happy, and let yourself be the best person that you could possibly be, which is the mission statement of Leos everywhere. For people born under the zodiac sign of Virgo, This Jupiter Saturn square is going to be a sobering one. In recent months, you may have come into a position of authority and responsibility in your life. Maybe you were promoted to a new position. Maybe you're a parent and you have a child, and so you're in a position of authority. Or maybe you were involved in a marriage and you went through a divorce, and you are a different authority now in the eyes of your kid. But whatever the particular shifts in your landscape, you have come into a position of authority. And even if you already were in a position of authority, you're wearing it differently now than you were maybe about 6 months ago. And so when you come into a position of authority, when you come into a position of leadership, when you come into a position where you're top person on the totem pole and all eyes are looking up at you, this is not the most comfortable position for a Virgo to be in. Virgos are used to being the power behind the throne, not sitting on the throne itself. Virgos are much more comfortable with an advisory position, a consulting position, a guiding position than they are with the person who's making the big decisions, who's setting down the rules and the laws, who's issuing decrees. And part of the reason for that is it is the nature of Virgo to question things. Was that good enough? Was that the best thing that I could have done? Or, ooh, I see so many faults in what I just did. I want a do over so I can do it better again next time. Okay, so Virgo is always questioning. And so to be in a position of authority where people are looking to you for final answers or judgments is quite a place to be. Now, on one hand, you're wearing this well. I think that Saturn's tenure in Pisces, your opposite zodiac sign, and it's been there for a number of months now, has really taught you that accepting yourself is better than getting down on yourself. Okay, that you probably with Saturn in opposition have gotten down on yourself to such a degree over the past year or so that right now accepting yourself is kind of like a breath of fresh air. What's wrong with being in my own corner? What's wrong with saying I was right or I'm figuring out this stuff as I go along? But the issue of authority, being in a position of authority or who you regard as being an authority in your life, this is a big issue right now with this Jupiter Saturn square. People can express authority in a variety of different ways. They can domineer, they can talk over you, they can sort of listen patiently and say, yeah, no. But sometimes people can express authority by withholding it. All right. And that's something that I want you to think about because the Saturn part of the equation of the Saturn Jupiter square, that's the planet that's sitting opposite you right now on the seesaw. Okay. That's the planet that's six zodiac signs away from you on the zodiacal wheel. All right. Saturn often controls by withholding. Okay. I'm not going to give you this. I could give you money and make your life easier, but you know what? I had to struggle when I was younger, and so I'm not going to give you this money to make life easier. I think you struggling is going to be character building. I had to build my character, and now you need to build yours. So I am withholding money, or I am withholding support, or I am withholding love. Okay. And sometimes people who withhold might be convinced that they're doing it to be character building, but a lot of times people withhold because they control. They know how much you want their approval. All right. They know how much you want their love. They know how much you want their support. But if they were to give their approval or love or support right away, would you treat them as a box that's been checked? Oh, I've got someone's love, I've got their support, I got their whatever. I don't have to think about them anymore. I'm going to carry on. Some people can feel that way about it, which is why they don't show it. They want to make sure that you appreciate them. They want to make sure that you create a place for them in your life. Okay. They want to make sure they're important to you. It's like a performer, and you hear this story all the time from actresses and comedians and people like that. They're doing a scene, they're doing an act, they're up on stage, the crowd is laughing or they're applauding or they're moved or something like that. And somehow the person on stage always zeroes in on the one person who yawns. They're not laughing. Or the one person who's maybe scrolling through their phone, or the one person who's like, now the whole theater could be like, "Oh my God, you're wonderful," and they're throwing roses and flowers and take another encore. But as a performer, you're still looking at the person who's like, and that's the one who's suddenly become the most important person in that performance. And that's what happens with authority figures when you have Saturn opposite. You may find yourself really focusing on that one person who isn't showing the support, who isn't giving the approval. And you may, in fact, be making them a bigger deal than they really are. This is something that happens a lot in parent-child relationships. It can happen a lot with a superior or a manager. The reason for the withholding could be control, but control can be done in different ways. It dominates in different ways. So my counsel that I would give to you is to not let yourself project onto an authority figure who isn't in your corner right now all of your worst case scenarios and your anxieties, and that you have to really win this person over. You don't need to win this person over. You've got a whole other audience, a whole other theater, which is singing your praises. You don't have to judge yourself based on the one person who didn't like it. And in that regard, when you do that, you're actually inflating their importance, and you don't need to be doing that right now. That's where the Jupiter and Gemini is like, hey, buddy, believe in yourself. Geminis have this wonderful ability to be like, oh, there was a sourpuss in the audience. Well, who cares? They were probably, they probably had gas or something like that. They make light of something, they move it along. And that's where you can let that Jupiter energy move through you. The other thing that I want to share with you before I come to an end with all of this is, are you playing the Saturn role in someone else's life? Are you withholding the love? Are you withholding the attention? Are you withholding the approval or the support, okay, as a form of domination? The funny thing about oppositions is that it's opposite. We have nothing to do with it, but we can also see the mirror reflection of ourselves. And sometimes an opposition really is an oppositional figure, but sometimes an opposition can be what we're projecting onto the other person. If it's not an authority figure who's saying no to you and making you sweat, ask yourself, are you the authority figure who's withholding, withdrawing, and making somebody else sweat? And why are you doing that? Is there something vindictive about that? Is there something controlling? Is this your way of dominating? And if it is, that's no way to be an authority. An authority should be benevolent. Do they become disciplinarians at different points? Sure. But becoming disciplinarian doesn't make you a brute or a bully or a tyrant. One needs to find that blend of the Jupiter and the Saturn, the hand that giveth, the hand that taketh away, the benevolence and support, but also within measure, and also teaching discipline. These are things that I want you to think about, Virgo, as Jupiter and Saturn form their square on August 19th. Libra, wow. What a high wire act you're doing these days. In fact, you may feel like an acrobat who's crossing on a tightrope over this pool of water underneath with a whole bunch of alligators who are salivating with huge eyes waiting for you to fall. As you make your way across this tightrope, they're just looking at you like, I can't wait for you to stumble. Okay, so this may be what you're feeling nowadays. With Jupiter's recent entrance into Gemini, which was at the end of March of this year, you would have started to feel a boldness, much more emboldened than you have in a long time. And that's saying a lot, because last year and this year, you've dealt with some pretty strong eclipses taking place in your zodiac sign, whether they were lunar eclipses or solar eclipses. These were things that were really sort of energies that were sort of throwing you off balance, but also insisting that you had to dump some things from your past and make a new way to forge a new path for yourself into the future. The idea of this new path into the future was encouraged, made even more powerful by Jupiter entering the zodiac sign of Gemini. And the reason for that is because Gemini is an air sign, Libra is an air sign. They form a trine. Okay, so Jupiter is completely in your corner. Jupiter believes in you. Okay, it's saying you can do this, you've got this, you are coming into your own. This is such a wonderful time for you to be a Libra. In fact, we should all be Libras because you're just really connecting to who you are right now. And as a Libra, that can be a really exhilarating feeling. But then at the same time, being born under the zodiac sign of the balance, you need to sort of balance that out. It's kind of like, I can't let myself get too carried away with this. I need a counterweight. Okay. I need something that's acting as a counterweight here. Remember that as a Libra, yours is the only zodiac sign that's not a human being or a creature. As a Libra, yours is the only zodiac sign that's an instrument. All right. It's the scales. And the scales were seen as a sign of civilization. Okay. And so this is why Librans are said to have a sort of civilizing influence. All right. You really need to hear both sides of a story. You really need to weigh things in the balance to make the right decision. Now, what's going on with Librans, why they're making this right decision? You are suffering from so much self-consciousness and anxiety and doubt and asking questions and looking around for someone to sort of take the reins here. Libra is the zodiac sign of partnership, and you're much more comfortable in a partnership than you are like on your own. And so, whenever a new path opens up in front of you, you're looking around for someone to come along with you, to hold hands with. We're going to go and travel this new path together. All right. So this is opening up here. All eyes are on you. There's a lot of pressure for you to make right decisions. There's a lot of pressure on you to be wise, to do right by other people. And so you yourself, because you're feeling this belief, you're feeling this kind of rise in personal stock, you feel a very keen responsibility and you don't want to make a bad decision. You don't want to mess up. So how do you get through a passage like this? You've got Jupiter on one hand, which is saying, you can do this. There's this new path in front of you. You have Saturn on the other hand, which is like, don't mess up. So how do you navigate this path? You navigate it like a tightrope walker. All right. You stay in the moment. The beautiful thing about Jupiter in a zodiac sign like Gemini is one of the most moment to moment signs of the zodiac. Gemini doesn't get too far ahead. Gemini doesn't linger in the past. Gemini is very much a present tense zodiac sign. It's very much in the moment. It's looking at its alternatives. It's rehearsing really good lines. It's studying its options. Because Gemini is the zodiac sign of play, it's like, well, what would happen if we did this? What would happen if we did that? What would happen if we took away this and introduced something else? So that playfulness is a really, really powerful component in Gemini, and it's there for you as a resource. As a Libra, you can get stuck going back and forth between this and that, one side of the story, the other side of the story. As a Libra, ambivalence can infiltrate your judgment. You're not really sold on this, you're not really sold on that. And there can become a hesitancy and a self-consciousness. You can sort of make a good, strong argument for one decision, make a good, strong argument for the opposite decision, and then you can stifle yourself. So what you need to do is sort of break up that stifleness, and you can break it up by staying in the moment, by being open to new ideas. The gifts of Gemini are spontaneity and inventiveness and finesse. Finesse is something that, for instance, if you're dealt a weak hand of cards, or you're in a position that's not really strong, you don't come out and say, I've been dealt a weak hand of cards, or I'm in a position that's not strong. I give up. You don't come out and say that. What you do is you work with what you do have. And maybe what you do have isn't a lot. Okay. You finesse it. Okay. You work with it. You lead people to believe that you're in a stronger position than you're really in. You study the rules of the game. You look at all the players in the game. You look at all the pieces on the board and you become more strategic. This is what makes Gemini so good at getting out of those tight corners that they can find themselves in. And because Libra, you're a cardinal sign, so your tendency is to see what the goal is, like you're always playing towards the goal, which is further down the road. Cardinal signs are very goal oriented, results oriented. This is where you need to let the mutability of Gemini come in, where you play with things, where you try out things, where you experiment with things. Because when you're in the moment, when you're improvising, when you're being spontaneous, your mind comes up with things a lot faster and it's a lot freer to communicate and to strategize than it is if you've like worked out a whole blueprint and you're sitting in front of it, like, trying to figure out how you're going to make these points all work. So feed off that Jupiter in Gemini moment of being spontaneous, of being inventive, of finding ways to finesse what might be a weakness into a strength, or maybe even a tactic or an angle to play. Trust in those abilities, and you're going to find this to be an extraordinary time where you really have gained the upper hand in a situation in which it looked like you didn't have the upper hand for a very long time. Scorpio. Scorpios are typically tight-fisted when it comes to finances. They know how to be frugal, they know how to stretch a buck, and they know how to get a lot on very little. And this comes from the time of year that Scorpio appears in the agricultural calendar. It's the heart of fall, it's the heart of autumn, when all the plenty of summer has been spent. The leaves on the trees have fallen, and everything, all those fruits and vegetables that look so robust over the summer, are nowhere to be found as we go into the heart of autumn and then into the winter. So, that feeling of preparing for scarcity is a very strong motivator with Scorpios. They're always making sure that they're not in a position of want. And so that's why they can be a bit tight fisted when it comes to finances. So, Scorpio, tight fisted when it comes to finances, not tight fisted when it comes to their obsessions. This is when you see Scorpios open the wallet and write the checks or hit the Venmo and pay the best prices that they can have in order to procure or possess. If Scorpio is obsessed with something, they will pay top dollar for it. This can also apply to people. Scorpios can be very guarded in the way that they love. They can be very sort of slow to show their deep and intense feelings. And the reason for this is because they know that if they open their heart, they're going to do anything for that person. That person suddenly becomes the most precious thing in a Scorpio's life. What this can lead a Scorpio to do is to spend a lot of money, to spend a lot of energy, to spend a lot of love on the object of desire. Sometimes a Scorpio can bankroll a ne'er-do-well heartthrob or a dreamy-eyed romantic who will never ever be able to pay their own way or get a job that funds them. Scorpios are like, I don't care, I love you, and if I have to go into debt paying for these things, then that's worth doing because I absolutely love and adore you. Okay. And many a Scorpio has gone into debt paying for someone who's not been able to carry their own weight in a relationship. And sometimes this can even apply to business relationships as well. Scorpios, when they want something, when they love someone or something, when they live for someone or something, they will give their absolute all. And it's almost like breathing life into that if it weren't for them, then this person would perish, or this beautiful piece of jewelry would go to some person who doesn't appreciate it. So Scorpions almost really sort of see themselves as breathing life and love into something. They're kind of like Noah with the ark, who's really running around making sure that every single animal that's special gets on that damn ark. Scorpios see themselves as kind of the salvation, because this is the person that they love. This is the thing that they cannot live without. And this is going to become amplified because Scorpio is a water sign. Saturn is in a water sign, Pisces, and there's a trine. So yearning for something you cannot have, but having it anyway, this is really what's going on with the Scorpio psyche right now. The Jupiter square, and Jupiter is in Gemini, and Gemini is a zodiac sign that's really associated to buying and selling and transactions. That's because it's Mercury ruled, and Mercury is the planet of transactions, of buying and selling. The Gemini component here, the Jupiter and Gemini component here is really kind of like, are you getting your money's worth? Or are you getting taken for a ride? Are you sure you can afford this? And why aren't you wheeling and dealing more? Why aren't you negotiating down that price? Why are you just giving this person all of your money? And why are you just giving this person all of your love? If I were you, the Jupiter and Gemini might be saying, I don't want to get used. I don't want to get robbed. I don't want to be taken. Okay, so this might be sort of showing up as a component with the Jupiter-Saturn square. So when Jupiter and Saturn form a square on August 19th, this may be where the person that you're financing, the person that you're bankrolling, the person that you're supporting, either financially or emotionally, comes to you for another handout, comes to you for more aid, comes to you for more support, comes to you because once again, they're in a problem or they're out of money, out of cash, and they need you to step in and pay for things to foot the bill. And what the stars are asking you to do is to say no. Okay. Now, it's not just going to be like, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, that's impractical. But it's important for you to say, no, I can't do it this time, but I can show you how to do it. Or, okay, maybe I'll take care of it right now, but this is going to be the first part of an installment plan where you need to pay me back by these dates. You need to sit down with this person and work out some kind of reciprocity. And the reciprocity cannot be a request or a plea or an ask. It needs to be true reciprocity. Now, if someone has been financially dependent on you, you can't all of a sudden be like tough love and pay for yourself. You can't expect that to work. It's not going to. But you can become active in the person getting financial literacy, in becoming aware of their spending habits, of going and getting a job, of contributing in some form. It cannot be you, once again, coming to the rescue of your obsession because you can't afford to do it anymore, either financially or emotionally. The great question is really going to be, you really need to know if you and this person are together because of love or money. Have you created a dependency for someone? And are they dependent upon you financially? And is that why they're with you? These are things that, as a Scorpio, you really have to take a hard look at. You're a water sign, you're a very loving sign, but sometimes in your protectiveness, you can create a dependency where the other person is always dependent on you. And that's not a good thing. It doesn't mean that the person has to make as much money as you or anything like that, but it does mean that the person has to contribute to your relationship and to your household in a financial way. Finances do have an emotional component to them. They're not always just business transactions or adding up sums to come up with a result. It's a big question for you, but if you're ever going to allay your fears and anxieties, and if you're ever going to know for certain that someone loves you for who you are, then they need to be financially solvent as well. And you're not doing them any favors by covering all the bills. Sagittarius. This Jupiter-Saturn square is going to kind of hit you where you live. And I'm not talking about your home life. I'm talking about hitting a raw nerve with you. This square involves two planets that are very important to you. One is Jupiter, which is your ruling planet, which sits opposite your zodiac sign right now. And the other is Saturn, which happens to reside in a Jupiter-ruled sign, and which is ultimately going to take the side of Jupiter and Gemini, which is sitting opposite you right now in the sky. When you're dealing with a planet in opposition, something is being kept from you. You're on one end of the zodiac wheel, and this planet is on the opposite end. It's as far away from you as it can possibly be. Okay, 180 degrees away from you on a 360-degree circle. So it's out of reach. You can't get to it. And it's not making any sort of motion to come towards you either. So there's this apartness, this separateness. And it's where you can feel very distant or very apart from the Jupiter energy in your life, which happens to be your own ruling planet. Oppositions in astrology, on one hand, they talk about the polar opposite, but then on the other hand, they can talk about projections, what we are projecting onto that other planet. If we could only have that planet, we would have all the things that we really want. And so this planet is opposite us. And so it's keeping us from having all the things that we want. Think of the United States Congress, which I often use as an example for oppositions. If we could only get the other party to work with us, then we could get some good governing done. But, I'm a Democrat or a Republican, and they're a Republican or a Democrat, and we just are not. There's no bridge, there's no bond, there's no unity here. And so you can project onto an opposition, I could only win you over to my side, I'd be happy. Or you can project onto an opposition, you're the reason why this doesn't work. You're the reason that I'm being thwarted and fouled. You're the reason why things are going to hell in a handbasket. So oppositions can bring out some very, very deep and powerful and profound triggers. This opposition is also affecting your relationships. And this may impact a business relationship, or this may impact a romantic relationship. Now, do you remember that phrase showed up a lot in grade school yearbooks? Okay, if you love someone, set them free. If they come back, they're yours. And if they don't, then they were never yours to begin with. It talked about love. It talked about whether you and someone were really supposed to be with one another or not. You may be feeling this a lot in a close relationship, where you're wondering why you and another person are together. This could be romantic, but this could also be a business situation. You may be wondering, is this the right job for me? Or am I trying to make something work here that's not working? Maybe I need to set them free. Maybe I need to set free a lover who's being very ambivalent, or maybe I need to separate myself from this work situation because it's just not really a fit. Because I need to see that if it comes back, we're meant to be. And if it doesn't, we were never meant to be to begin with. So this Saturn-Jupiter square might bring a sort of philosophical element to the way that you're sizing up your relationships and associations right now. And because you're a Sagittarius and Jupiter, your ruling planet, is now currently in the zodiac sign of Gemini, you may see the other person as holding all the cards. In other words, it's that person's decision. It's my spouse's decision. It's my lover's decision. It's my superior's decision, my client's decision, my manager's decision. It's not mine. And so they hold all the cards. I should brace myself for you may feel yourself not at your peak and at your top performance because Jupiter, your ruling planet, is as far away as it can be on the zodiacal wheel. Okay. And so you don't feel emboldened or empowered right now. This is exacerbated by Saturn forming a square to Jupiter. So it's making it feel like maybe circumstances are against you, life is against you, things aren't coming together in the way that you wanted them to. You know, you've given up on asking the question, can things get any worse? Because life has a tendency of saying, yes, they can, and this is how. You know, that might have been your experience of the past few weeks in the run up to this square. But the thing is, when you're feeling at this much of a loss, you can't give up, okay? Because you would be giving up on your ruling planet, and your ruling planet will never give up on you. Ruling planets are like your patron saint, corporate sponsor, dead mother, and life coach all wrapped up into one. It's the planet you're born under. It may be opposite you in the sky, you know, it may be having a hard time connecting with you, but because it's your ruling planet, it's your cosmic sponsor, it's always in your corner and it's always trying to get back to you. So you can't give up on that. And what Jupiter is asking you not to give up on is your stay in a situation. Okay. This is not the time to say it's the spouse's decision or the lover's decision or the boss's decision. No, it's your decision. Do you want to be here or not? Do you want to be in this relationship or this association or not? Is this a relationship where you feel like you're really good for one another, or is it where you're bringing out the worst in another? Is this a job situation where you feel fulfilled, or is it a job situation where you're feeling exhausted, unappreciated, and just not seen and not into it, not inspired? Oppositions can allow for a parting of the ways. Okay. The square will always add a condition to it. And when we're dealing with that here, a square, so there would be a penalty or something you would have to incur or put up with, pay back, or something along those lines. But if it's for your mental health, your spiritual health, then it's absolutely worth it. This is what's going on with you these days. And so by setting that person free, rather than waiting for the person to make the decision, by saying, you know, maybe we should take some time off. Maybe you should, you know, sort of figure out your feelings. You're putting it back on that person and you're taking the authority back to yourself. I mean, it's hard to be the person like, are they going to come back or not, you know? And of course, as the phrase goes, if they come back, you know that it's worth working on. If the boss or the manager comes back to you with something that might be more suitable or accommodating, it's worth working on. And if they don't, then you know that it wasn't. But before I conclude my talk with you today, I want you to reverse it because this is something that I like to do with oppositions. Put the shoe on the other foot. Are you asking the other person to set you free? Have you given them such a say and so much authority that you're waiting on them to set you free so that you can go without having to feel bad about the decision you made or without having to feel like you made a bad judgment call? Or are you putting it on a boss or a manager so that they make that decision for you? That sets up a pattern that will repeat itself over and over and over. And and part of it comes from giving the other person the authority and working from that rubric. But the other part of it is that it plays into part of the Jupiterian temperament. And part of the Jupiter temperament is anywhere but here. If I had a t-shirt to give people born under Sagittarius and even Pisces, it would be anywhere but here, because there's always a need for escape to get out of where you are, because there's this feeling that your real life is happening somewhere else. And so by not doing the work yourself, and the work here would be you letting the other person go, you deciding we're going to take a break. If you don't do it yourself, you will engage this over and over again. And so this is the quandary. This is the moral dilemma that you may find yourself in right now. But remember, even if you feel like you don't have choices, you have a choice. Even if you feel like you don't have a say, you have a say. And so finding out where you have that say, where you have that choice, and taking it upon yourself to make that choice and decision about a relationship or association or the circumstances where you find yourself right now, that will either allow you to leave if you truly want to leave, or to take a moment and say, okay, let's give this another try if you want to give it another try. But what's important, Sagittarius, is that you be the one who's making this decision. Capricorn, the way you work is changing. Now, you used to be strictly for profit, all right? You used to be like, you take a job, you work your way up the ladder, you give the best that you can give, you get ahead, and you make a profit, you make money, you turn yourself into a success. And as a mountain goat, you're used to doing this on your own. If there was ever a problem at work, you went and solved it. If there was a project to be done, you went and put together that project, and then you would come back with the answer or with the project and sort of pass it to everyone as a fait accompli. What can happen when you've got Saturn in a zodiac sign like Pisces is you can become a bit formulaic. It's the same thing over and over and over again. And why wouldn't it be over and over again if it's reaping dividends or yielding wonderful rewards? What's come up here with Jupiter entering into the zodiac sign of Gemini is trying something different. Now, you may have just recently completed a chapter in your life. Maybe it's a work chapter or a years long running job or a place that you found yourself in your life. What I'm referencing here is Pluto having been in Capricorn since 2008, 2009. And so, because Pluto's just switched signs this year, it's going to step back into Capricorn and then it's going to really leave at the end of the year. You may have finished a way of working. Maybe it's a career track. Maybe it's a long-standing project. Maybe it was a particular trade that you were involved in. It's come to an end. And you're now fishing around for something new, fishing around for something different. Maybe it's completely new and different from anything you've ever done before. But because it's Saturn in Pisces, my inclination is to go with the idea of reconnecting to an old talent, to an old aptitude, skill, ability, something that was a part of your life earlier in your life, and that maybe you didn't give much credence to, maybe you didn't value it, maybe you moved on to something else, maybe it didn't pay the rent, and so that's why you never followed through. Right now, this is coming up for you, this old talent, skill, ability, interest, pursuit, aspiration, and it's being echoed by the people in your life. Moreover, your way that you work is changing. You might have had a very stratified or hierarchical way of working. And Jupiter and Gemini in the past few months might have introduced a more collaborative way of working with other people, where they bring their perspectives, their ideas, their gifts, their talents, and you work with it. You don't have to be the person in charge. Pisces is a mutable sign. Okay, so it's very flexible, it's open to different ideas. And with it squared to Jupiter, your ruling planet Saturn has to genuflect to Jupiter. It has to follow Jupiter's lead in Gemini. So this isn't something that's assaulting you. This isn't something that's saying to you, do or die, or you have to do this or forget your whole life. It's lovely. It's very playful, which is Gemini. It's very engaging, which is Gemini. And it's working alongside with, which is Gemini. Gemini likes to improvise. It likes to be spontaneous. It likes to try different things and to explore and to experiment. And this spirit of exploration and experimentation maybe coming into your work life with what you do. Maybe you're mastering new technology because it's going to enable you to do so much more than you ever did before. Or maybe you've moved over into a new line of work, but you're coming in with fresh perspectives. In any case, you're really listening to people, you're really benefiting from people, and you're listening back or you're benefiting back. In other words, what am I trying to say? It's reciprocal. People are giving and working with you, and you are giving and working with them. And it's turning into a wonderful dynamic here. Now, there are going to be times when Jupiter gets a little too fast, a little too reckless, a little too, let's try something different just to try something different. But what's happening here is that you finally reached a point in your life, or you're at a point in your life where you can say, my old way of doing things isn't the way it always has to be. You can embrace the futurism of this Jupiter in Gemini with its fresh perspectives. And instead of feeling outdated, you may be feeling up to date, and certainly what you're going to be feeling is a renewal and a reinvigoration. And you may have finally discovered a place to apply talents and skills and interests that have been postponed for too long. In other words, the time for doing these things that you're good at and that you really enjoy, that time looks like it has finally arrived. Aquarius, you can walk out on things if you want to. Now, that might sound a little staggering being said so boldly and so explicitly, but what's going on here with this Saturn Jupiter square is that Saturn stands for the feeling of obligation and responsibility. Being a Saturn born sign, because Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius, you sort of collect obligations and responsibilities like a child collects seashells on the beach. They just sort of end up with you. And you can define yourself by those responsibilities and obligations. Now, you just don't agree to them outright. They have to have something that lifts everyone up with them. These have to be very noble responsibilities. These have to be obligations that serve a greater purpose, that serve an ideal vision in some sort of way. So that's the Saturn part of this Saturn Jupiter square. The Jupiter part is more perhaps enlivening and more resonant for you right now. Saturn may be your ruling planet, and it's in the zodiac sign of Pisces, but Jupiter is in the zodiac sign of Gemini, which is an air sign, and it's trining Aquarius, which is also an air sign. Jupiter entered the zodiac sign of Gemini in late March. And since then, you've been feeling a sort of restlessness. Since then, you've been wondering if you can do better than the situation that you're in. And since then, you perhaps have been presented with a series of opportunities to leave where you are now and to go somewhere else. That might just be travel, but it could be a relocation or a move or a complete change in a life course or your life path. But this isn't going to be a sudden thing that's thrown at you from out of left field. It's not going to be a brass ring you have to grab, and if you miss it, everything's over. Jupiter in Gemini is really sort of opening up an alternative. You might even have a series of 2 to 3 alternatives. One of them is starting to look better and better. One of them is starting to feel more heartfelt. Okay, you could really see yourself living this kind of life or going in this kind of direction. And you could really leave what you have right now. Now, do you leave it today? No. Do you leave it tomorrow? No. Next month? No. But over the next year, year and a half, this is going to become more of a thing. And the reason why it's going to become more of a thing is Jupiter will have wound up its stay in Gemini. As I said before, Gemini is an air sign just like Aquarius, so they trine. There's an understanding of one another here. And Jupiter is a planet that's associated to a higher purpose and maybe even in some ways a sense of destiny. So Jupiter may be showing you a new way of what you could be. But as Jupiter winds up its stay in the zodiac sign of Gemini next May, at this time, you have the two modern planets, or following next May, you have the two modern planets, Neptune and Uranus, moving into new signs. Neptune moves into Aries and sort of dips its toe in the pool before moving back. And then Uranus also moves into Gemini, dips itself in the pool, and moves back. So, what the modern planets, in conjunction with this Jupiter tenure in Gemini, are showing you is you could actually grow in this direction. You could actually move in this direction. And this would be a very fulfilling way to go. This would be a very pleasurable thing to do. And they're kind of also saying, you have all the time in the world here. As I said, these don't have to be sudden or brash or abrupt decisions. These can be ideas that you warm to. These can be possibilities that slowly ripen, and that these can be alternatives that right now they might look a bit far-fetched, but you can start to see as becoming more realistic. So I'm not just talking to you about the square on August 19th. I'm actually moving you into the 2025 and even 2026 direction. And I want you to think that long term. You're an Aquarius, so you're always thinking of the future. You're always thinking ahead. And you're also always tormented by the question of, am I ahead of my time or has my time come? And to be ahead of your time can mean that you're so pioneering and so innovative that people don't get what you're talking about. Whereas if you're working in conjunction with time, if your time has come, then you are easily moving into a new stage of your life, a new development in your life organically. And everyone else is getting what you're about. They're like, oh, wow, that makes so much sense that you would live there, or it makes so much sense that you would decide to be with this person in a relationship. So these are things that are very organic as they open up the new vista that you're moving into. And as you wait to see how it unfolds, you don't want to do it arms akimbo or arms crossed, like, show me what's unfolding. You want to be like, oh, that's a possibility, or oh, I could see this, or oh, that's how that could work like that. You really want to do it with a fascination. You really want to do it with a wonder. If you enter into this period of time with a sense of curiosity and wonder and fascination, I can't even begin to describe you. I cannot begin to describe how rich and how fulfilling your future is going to be. Pisces. It's not going to be easy playing the Saturn role in the Saturn-Jupiter square. That's not going to be an easy position for you to be in, because when Saturn is in your zodiac sign, it can make you defensive. It can bring out self-blame. It can make you feel guilty. It can make you feel like you have to take the submissive position if someone is coming on strong in a sort of angry way. I'm thinking of a dog park here. If there's a very bullying dog, and if another dog feels like it's coming at it, it will take the submissive position. You may feel those things with Saturn being in Pisces. Saturn has a tendency to withdraw when it is presented with a difficult situation or problematic situation. And a Saturn-Jupiter square will always introduce a problem, usually a moral dilemma. And what you may be feeling right now is that you're beset with a confrontation and you don't want anything to do with it. And so you're going to retreat, you're going to withdraw. You may add the extra Piscean dimension to it, which is, I have no idea what you're upset about. I have no idea of how I've wronged you. And this is kind of Pisces's way of slipping out of what can be an unpleasant situation. Saying that you have no idea what a loved one is talking to you about is not the way to go with this Saturn-Jupiter square, because the loved one will either match you with withdrawal, on your withdrawal. They'll say, like, okay, well, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to have this conversation with you. Or the loved one is going to come down the hole after you and come looking for you. But in any case, avoiding a confrontation, not taking responsibility for it, leaning into your guilt and the difficulties that you're having in life, this is not the way to go. Now, do we have things that we feel guilty about or bad about? Absolutely. But guilt can also be a form of defense. Guilt can be like, I'm full of so much more remorse than you could ever instill in me. Like I'm full of this remorse, and how can you make me feel worse than I already do? Another aspect of Saturn and Pisces is you get down on yourself more than the other person could get down on yourself. In other words, you're more self-immolating or more self-abasing or self-critical and things like that. And these can come across as defense mechanisms. They can be defense mechanisms. It comes out of that sort of self-criticism. You think you're critical of me, I can show you that I'm much more critical of me than you. And that's the way of not hearing what someone has to say. You need to hear what people are needing to say right now. It is not good to put off for tomorrow a conversation that you should be having today. And a conversation where you are listening to this person's grievances and where the person is taking responsibility for those grievances. Because you're dealing with a Jupiter and Saturn square, there is a very strong possibility, probably even a commitment to taking responsibility. So if the other person is having a problem with you, they are looking to take responsibility for what their actions were. And the expectation is that you take responsibility for what your actions were. So if your response is, I have no idea what you're talking about, you're not engaging in the seriousness of this conversation. You're not engaging in the seriousness of this trust exercise. If this person's being abusive, you need to point that out, but not as you're being abusive, but as like, that kind of language isn't going to help us have the conversation we need to have right now. Gemini is a conversational sign. Jupiter in Gemini is very reaching out. It's very conversational. The problem that Saturn might have is that it doesn't want to be reached out to. It wants to withdraw. And so that's where, as someone who's got Saturn moving through your zodiac sign of Pisces, you need to push yourself forward. You need to engage in this conversation. This person is trying to work out with you how your relationship is going to be. There's going to be discussion of a lot of sensitive topics, disappointments, grievances, where things didn't come together. And so there's an exposure here. There's a nakedness here. This is something that you can be beautiful at. Pisces has an ability to speak from the heart and to speak from the soul. There's a compassion, there's a sympathy. So what you need to do on this August 19th date is to lower the deflector shields, as they used to say on Star Trek, old school Star Trek. You need to lower the deflector shields and to open all hailing frequencies to this person who really wants to have a heart-to-heart talk with you. And it may be a series of heart-to-heart talks where you're trying to mend your relationship, where you're trying to salvage your association. When this person takes responsibility, accountability for what they did, don't say, aha, that's what you did. Don't do that. Match them with what you did. When they say, okay, I got off the wrong track by saying this, respond with, and I got off the wrong track by saying this. Stay on your end so that the conversation is kind of like a ping pong ball game where the ball bounces back and forth in a volley between the two of you. And let that play out, because on the other side of that will be a sense of intimacy and belonging and togetherness that has been missing for far too long. Something that will bring you together, a mending of a bridge that has been in disrepair for weeks, if not for months. And this is where the square between Jupiter and Saturn can take on much more of a collaborative element than a competitive one. And it's one that's going to benefit you and the other person. If you enjoyed what you saw, please press the like button. It helps more than you know. If you could subscribe, that would be wonderful. I've had such a wonderful time visiting with you this week, and I can't wait to get together next time on Christopher Runstrom Astrology.